The dumbest robbery I have ever witnessed happened right in front of me, and I was the one being robbed. My name is Amelia, and I work the register at a small grocery store tucked between a flower shop and a pawn shop in a part of town that was more sleepy than sketchy. My shifts were quiet, filled with routine, scanning barcodes, stacking bags, dealing with regulars who always bought the same milk, the same bread, the same lottery tickets. Nothing ever happened. That is, until one particular Tuesday when everything turned upside down in the stupidest way imaginable. I was halfway through my morning shift, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug behind the register, scrolling through specials in the store system. The usual customers had come and gone. Old Mrs. Valerie, who always bought tissues and complained about the weather. A construction guy with dusty boots who grunted more than he spoke. A mother with 3 loud children and enough coupons to slow the line to a crawl. It was the kind of day that felt like it was dragging its feet. I was bored. And bored in this job meant safe. Predictable. Comfortable. Until the bell over the door jingled, and in walked a man who immediately made every hair on my arms stand on end. He was probably around 35, wearing a hooded jacket zipped up way too high for the temperature outside, and sunglasses even though it was cloudy. He looked around the store like he was checking for someone, or something. I should have known. Something in my gut tightened, but I just smiled politely, nodding the way I always did. I did not expect him to come straight to the register and quietly say, "Empty the cash register." No. I blinked. I even smiled a bit wider, because it sounded absurd. I thought he was joking. I actually looked around like there was a hidden camera, thinking someone had set me up for a prank. In my country in this era, who even robs stores anymore? We have surveillance on every corner. Neighborhoods with Facebook groups. Panic buttons under every counter. But then I saw it. The glint. A knife. Cold, real, and sharp, clutched tightly in his hand. My blood turned into slush. My lungs forgot how to breathe properly. I had seen cold steel in movies, sure, but never like this. Never within slicing distance of my own ribs. I froze. The panic button was about 15 inches to my left. I could have hit it if I were stupid. But in that moment my hands turned into stones. My fingers refused to move. I looked at him, then at the register. The logic center of my brain returned and screamed that no amount of loyalty to this store was worth my life. So I opened the register, slow and deliberate, hands trembling, and began to pull out the bills. But I was not about to let him take everything. I was not heroic, but I was not stupid either. So while I pulled out bills with one hand, I let a few flutter to the ground near my feet. Not a lot. Just enough to make sure that the store would not be left totally dry. I kept talking softly, like I was trying to soothe a frightened animal, but he just stared at me, breathing heavily, his jaw tight. I shoved the bills into the crumpled plastic shopping bag he had thrown at me. My hands brushed against the edge of the register drawer and instinctively, I nudged a 50 behind it, hiding it from his view. Then, like something out of a weird sitcom, he ordered me to stay still and backed away, still holding the knife. But instead of running for the exit like any other robber might, he walked calmly toward the back of the store. I was too stunned to move, too afraid to breathe too loudly. I stood frozen as I heard rustling, some thuds, and the unmistakable sound of potato chip bags crinkling. A few seconds later he returned, stuffing 5 packs of chips into his already bulging bag. Salted. Sour cream and onion. Barbecue. Who the hell robs a store and then goes back for snack food? I just stared at him. He was a criminal, yes, but he was also just sad. Like he had not thought this through. Like he was improvising a robbery the way someone might improvise a last-minute dinner. He looked at me and warned me not to tell anyone, that if I said a word or filed a report, he would find me. His voice shook. Not with rage, but with fear. He was scared too. I nodded silently, heart hammering like it wanted to break out of my ribs. I agreed with everything he said. I would not make noise. I would not move. Just leave. Please, just leave. And he did. Or he tried to. Because just as he reached the door, he tripped on the little threshold step that the delivery guys always cursed. One foot caught, his weight tilted forward, and he pitched onto the pavement outside like a sack of bricks. I gasped. I thought he had hit his head. He was lying awkwardly, arms twisted, the bag of stolen chips and money sprawled across the sidewalk. For a split second, I thought he was dead. I genuinely stood there, shocked beyond words, thinking I had just watched a man die during the dumbest robbery ever attempted in our country. I rushed to the doorway, peeked out, and saw he was breathing but completely unconscious. My instincts returned like a flood. I slammed the door shut, locked it from the inside, and ran to the back room to grab the phone. I dialed the police and tried to speak coherently, but the adrenaline made my voice shaky. They arrived in less than 5 minutes. When they saw the man lying there still out cold, with his haul of 5 snack bags and a few hundred in rumpled bills, they looked confused. Then they checked the footage. That was the moment the absurdity of it all hit me. Because on camera, it looked like I had somehow knocked him out cold. I had to explain, in detail, that I had not touched him. That he tripped. That it was his own foot, not my fist. They asked if I had training in self-defense. I said I had not even moved. Then I showed them the part of the footage where he slipped like a bad cartoon and face planted into the pavement. They rewound it. Then replayed it. Then one of the officers laughed. The others joined in. I stood there, still shaking, and then I started laughing too. Because what else can you do after surviving a knife-point robbery that ends with your attacker unconscious thanks to a badly placed step and his own clumsiness? They took him away in the squad car, bag of stolen goods and all. I gave a statement. They told me I would need to come down later in the week to testify. And then one of the officers, kind-faced and amused, handed me a soda from the back of the patrol car. Told me to sit down and take the rest of the day off. I did. I sat there behind the locked door of the store, staring at the cash register, then at the front step, still stunned that I had lived through something so ridiculous. I should have been terrified. I should have been traumatized. And yes, some part of me was. But more than anything, I was just stunned and weirdly relieved that it had ended this way. No blood. No loss of life. Just a clumsy, snack-obsessed robber, a bruised ego on his end, and a story I would probably never stop telling. Because that was the day I got robbed, and the robber knocked himself out before he could even make it around the corner. Update 1. When I came back to work the next day, my legs still felt like jelly, and my nerves were far from settled. I had not even slept properly the night before. My brain kept replaying the absurd scene of the would-be robber collapsing at the door, the crinkle of the chip bags muffled under him, the echo of the officers' laughter as they reviewed the footage. Even now, in the broad light of day, it still felt like some sort of fever dream. The store was just opening when I walked in, and the manager, Mark, the owner and the one who always wore suspenders no matter the weather, was already waiting for me behind the customer service desk. His expression was unreadable, which only made the knots in my stomach tighten. For a moment, I thought he might be upset about the money. Even though I had hidden some, the cash drawer was still lighter than usual. I was prepared to explain it all again, just like I had to the officers. I had my facts straight. My hands had trembled, but my story had not. But instead of being angry, Mark looked at me with a strange mix of disbelief and restrained amusement. He told me he had seen the camera footage at home that night. He could not believe what he had witnessed. A robbery that ended not with violence or destruction but with a grown man tripping over his own feet and rendering himself unconscious. He asked if I was all right, and I nodded, still clutching my jacket. He said something about how I must have nerves of steel because not once did I flinch or scream, not even when the knife was right in front of me. I was still trying to process it myself. Then he did something I never expected. He took out a small notebook, the one where he kept handwritten notes about inventory and hours worked, and scribbled something down. He tore out the page and handed it to me. It was a bonus slip. Not huge, but definitely more than I ever expected for standing still and keeping my mouth shut during a crisis. He said it was for exceptional calm and composure in the face of criminal activity. I was stunned. I had been ready to defend myself, to explain why I had not hit the panic button, why I had not screamed, why I had let him walk into the back of the store like he owned the place. And yet, the outcome had somehow been better than anything I could have planned. As the day progressed, every single coworker who came in had heard about the incident. And not just from me. Mark had shared the footage with some of the staff through the store's internal group chat. It did not take long before people started reenacting the fall at the front entrance, tripping dramatically over the small threshold while holding empty bags. They turned it into a joke. I watched from behind the register as one of the stock boys dragged a bag of chips behind him like a trophy. One of the girls from produce pretended to faint onto a stack of canned tomatoes, mimicking the collapse. They were all laughing. Not at me, but at how surreal the whole situation had been. One of the night shift employees said I had magical powers, that I had stunned the guy without even blinking. Another one joked that we should leave the step at the entrance just the way it was and put up a sign that said, "Beware Karma Zone." Someone else said that if there was a robbery competition, I would win first place for most peaceful takedown. The entire atmosphere, instead of being heavy or tense, became oddly celebratory. No one was hurt. Nothing was damaged. The store did not even lose that much money, thanks to what I had secretly shoved behind the drawer. And the robber? He was in custody with bruised pride and a video online that was probably being passed around some police WhatsApp groups by now. By mid-afternoon, the story had spread to a few regular customers. A man who came in every Thursday for sunflower seeds clapped me on the back and said I had guts. An older woman who always bought tin mackerel said I must have been protected by angels. People treated me like I had done something incredible, like I had disarmed the man with my mind or cast a spell with my glare. The truth was far less heroic. I had done nothing. And yet, that was the point. I had done nothing. No sudden movements. No panic. No fight. And because of that, no one had gotten hurt. Mark came back near closing time, still smiling as he reviewed receipts and invoices. He told me again how proud he was and repeated that the bonus was deserved. He said the store could always train someone to run the till, but you could not teach someone how to keep their cool when staring down a knife. He said it in his usual deadpan tone, but I could tell he meant it. He had owned the place for 20 years, and in all that time, nothing like this had ever happened. He said if anything else ever did happen again, he hoped I would be the one on shift. As I tucked the bonus slip into my bag and turned off the register for the night, I felt something strange wash over me. A kind of peace. Not pride exactly, but something close. I had always thought that bravery meant doing something, shouting, fighting back, resisting. But now I knew that sometimes, not doing anything could be just as powerful. I had been still. I had been quiet. I had not escalated the situation. And in the end, the universe itself had handled the rest. I walked out into the cool air, locking the door behind me, and passed by the very spot where the man had fallen. There was no trace of him now. Just a faint scuff mark on the sidewalk and a memory etched into every inch of that entrance. I glanced down at it, then smiled, because that was the day I got written a bonus for doing absolutely nothing. And I would never forget it. Update 2. It had been a few days since the robbery, and things were slowly returning to normal at the store. The incident had already become legend among the employees, and my bonus had been processed without issue. The threshold where the would-be robber had met his downfall was unofficially renamed the Step of Justice, and people were still joking about it whenever they passed by. I thought the worst was behind me. But then I got the call. A woman from the police department contacted me and politely asked me to come in to give a formal statement for the investigation. I had already spoken to the officers at the scene, but this was the official next step in the process. I agreed, even though my stomach sank a little at the thought of returning to that part of the story again. I could still remember how my hands had trembled, how cold the knife had looked, and how surreal the man's fall had been. When I arrived at the precinct, the atmosphere was more relaxed than I had expected. The officer who greeted me offered me coffee and even cracked a joke about whether I had brought my magic step with me. I managed a nervous smile and followed him into a small interview room with frosted glass windows. I sat across from a young officer who already had a notepad open. Another officer entered the room and told me the man who had tried to rob the store was conscious now and being held in the same building, and that he had already started talking. I did not expect what came next. While I was carefully going over my statement, explaining how I opened the register, how I subtly hid some of the money, how I avoided sudden movements, and how I had watched him knock himself out cold at the exit, there was a sudden knock on the door. Another officer poked his head in, shaking his head, and said, almost laughing, that the suspect had just accused me of staging the entire robbery. At first, I thought he was joking. But he went on to explain that the man was claiming I had made up the entire event. That I had paid him to come in and pretend to rob me so I could look like a hero and collect a financial reward from the store. He even went as far as to say that the knife he was holding had been given to him by me, and that I had carefully coached him on what to say and do. According to him, the plan had been for him to take just enough money to make it look real, while I got to be the innocent cashier who got rewarded for her bravery. I sat there stunned. My mouth went dry. My entire face must have looked like a blank wall because the officer across from me started laughing almost immediately. He had to cover his face with the notepad to stop from bursting out. The other officers in the room were shaking their heads, clearly trying to hold it in. One of them muttered that it was the most pathetic deflection he had ever heard in his 10 years on the job. They asked me to wait a moment, while they pulled up the security footage again, this time in another room where a couple of other officers were gathered. I followed them down the hallway, heart pounding, unsure if I should be offended or entertained. When we arrived, the footage was already queued up, and once again, I watched the entire scene unfold on screen. The man entering nervously, threatening me with a knife, the slow and trembling movement of my hands, him walking into the back and looting chips like it was a lazy afternoon shopping spree, and finally, the fall. That legendary moment when his foot snagged on the tiny lip of the door, and he went flying like a cartoon character in slow motion. His bag exploded with snacks and bills like confetti. And then came the sound I least expected, laughter. Real, unfiltered, uncontrollable laughter from the officers watching the footage. One of them laughed so hard he nearly dropped his coffee. Another leaned against the wall, wiping tears from his eyes. The man behind the desk shook his head and said it was the best thing he had seen all month. Someone else said they should submit the footage to some local comedy channel because it was too good to keep to themselves. I stood there, frozen. Not angry, not even annoyed. Just shocked. The man had actually tried to spin this as an inside job. As if I had orchestrated this whole thing just to get a bonus and a pat on the back. He was in custody, his face still bruised from the fall, his fingerprints on the knife, his voice clearly recorded in the surveillance footage telling me to empty the register, and he still had the nerve to accuse me of staging it all. One officer finally caught his breath and said there were dumb criminals, and then there was this guy. That trying to gaslight a room full of officers with full surveillance footage and eyewitness testimony was a new level of desperate. Another chimed in and said the guy clearly thought he was in a spy movie and not a small-town grocery store. I sat down slowly on the nearest chair as they continued to laugh. I looked around, still trying to process how far the man was willing to go to avoid responsibility. I had expected denial, maybe some nonsense about being drunk or confused. But framing me as the mastermind of a fake robbery to make a quick bonus. It was so far-fetched it was almost insulting, and yet so laughable it was hard to even be offended. It was like accusing someone of faking a thunderstorm because they needed a day off work. I watched the footage one more time. I saw myself, nervous but steady, doing everything I could to de-escalate the situation. I saw the pathetic fall again. And then I saw the other side of the glass, where the man sat in an interview room, gesturing wildly and clearly trying to spin some elaborate fairy tale to an officer who looked like he was struggling not to burst into laughter. The lead officer finally turned to me and said they had all the evidence they needed and that I had nothing to worry about. He said I had been calm, professional, and above all, lucky. I nodded, still stunned. They asked me to sign a couple of documents, gave me a copy of the case number, and told me I would be contacted again if the case went to court. Then, as I was walking toward the door, someone behind me muttered loud enough for the whole hallway to hear that I had single-handedly taken down the dumbest criminal in the city without lifting a finger. The whole room burst into laughter again. I walked out in silence, my brain still buzzing, my heart weirdly calm, and my mind spinning from what I had just heard. I had not expected any of this. Not the robbery. Not the fall. Not the bonus. And definitely not the part where the robber tried to say I had framed him in order to become Employee of the Month. As I stepped into the sunlight outside the station, I realized I had just witnessed another level of ridiculousness I would never forget. And even though I was too shocked to laugh in the moment, the sound of the police officers still howling behind me echoed in my ears. Because this man had not only failed to rob a store, he had managed to turn himself into the punchline of a story that was still being told with tears of laughter. Update 3. The story should have ended at the police station with the laughter and the footage. But it did not. The man who attempted to rob our modest grocery store and then knocked himself out cold on the threshold could not accept the embarrassment. It turned out he had ambitions. He did not just want to be a thief, he wanted to be a professional. The kind of criminal who could pull off perfect hits and disappear like smoke. But now, instead of being feared or admired in whatever weird corner of his imagination that plan had grown in, he had become a joke, the town's favorite walking punchline. And he hated it. I learned through the officers, who later came by the store again for follow-up details, that he had hired what they jokingly called a half-lawyer. A man without a real degree, someone with just enough legal knowledge to be dangerous but not enough to be taken seriously in any courtroom. He called himself a legal consultant, but everyone knew he used to do taxes for people who never paid them. Apparently, the robber thought that with this man's help, he could somehow undo the charges against him. His claim? That the knife was a prop. That the entire incident was part of a staged video project gone wrong. That I was in on it. That the fall had been a performance piece. The officers could barely say it with a straight face. They said he came into the courtroom standing tall, dressed in a second-hand suit that looked like it had been purchased for a school play. His legal representative stood beside him flipping through printouts, trying to find angles that did not exist. They tried to object to the surveillance footage being used as evidence. They argued that it had been tampered with. They said the man had been tricked, coerced, emotionally manipulated. That the cashier, me, had acted with malicious intent to entrap him into a crime he did not intend to commit. The judge did not even dignify the argument with a response. The footage alone made it impossible to spin the story in any other direction. Every frame painted the truth with perfect clarity. His hand gripping the knife. My trembling fingers. The slow movement of the cash. The chip bags. The ridiculous return to the snack aisle in the middle of a supposed robbery. And then the legendary fall. Over and over, the video played in silence while muffled laughter rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor did not even have to say much. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimony was solid, and every time they tried to pivot the blame, they only looked more ridiculous. The judge handed down a sentence that was more symbolic than severe. Community service. Restitution to the store. A formal charge on his record. But the real punishment came from the outside world. Because within 24 hours of the trial, the footage hit the internet. It started on a local crime blog. A short clip titled, "Robber trips on exit, knocks himself out cold." Then it appeared on a humor site, and before long, the city's morning news ran a segment on it. They edited it with dramatic music, slow motion, and even zoomed in on his face mid-fall. They called him the Slippery Bandit. Someone else dubbed him the snack snatcher. Within days, people recognized him on the street. They laughed when he walked by. Some even took pictures with him. He had dreamed of being a legend among criminals. A man known for slick heists and perfect escapes. Instead, he had become a meme. A man who failed so completely, so absurdly, that even strangers at bus stops quoted the news clip about him. It turned out he had been trying to build a reputation. This was not his first attempt, just his first one caught on camera. Before this, he had shoplifted from a small electronics store and failed to outrun a 12-year-old who chased him for 2 blocks. He had once tried to rob a laundromat but got stuck in the window. Now this grocery store debacle sealed his fate. People came into the store talking about him constantly. Regulars brought up the video as if it were a local sports highlight. Some asked me to tell the story again. They laughed at how calm I had been. How stupid he had been. How justice had come in the form of a concrete step and a plastic bag of chips. I heard that the half-lawyer dropped him as a client after being humiliated during the trial. Said he could not represent someone who refused to take reality seriously. The man disappeared for a while after that. No one saw him around. Rumor had it he moved to a different city, hoping to escape the fame. But the internet never forgets. Every time his name came up in background checks or casual searches, the videos surfaced again. He had not just failed at robbery, he had succeeded at immortalizing himself as the dumbest criminal in the region. As for me, the attention died down slowly. People eventually stopped asking about the bonus, the footage, the fall. But the legacy remained. The store kept the step exactly as it was. Some suggested putting up a small plaque. Others proposed a sticker with a cartoon of a man slipping. We settled for a security sign that read, "Smile, you're on camera, and yes, it's recording everything." I never saw him again after the trial. I figured he had learned his lesson. Or at the very least, realized that infamy was not the kind of legacy worth chasing. He had aimed for greatness in the criminal world and landed face first in front of a grocery store. He wanted to be respected, feared, admired by thieves. But instead, he became a cautionary tale with a laugh track. That is how it ended. Not with violence. Not with a getaway. But with laughter. From the police. From the public. From everyone who watched a man try to be a professional thief and become the funniest face in town.